While they seem real to us, our perceptions can often be rooted in inaccurate views and beliefs that have a dramatic effect on how we show up and engage in the world. Hi everyone, how's it going? I'm Wackett. Thanks for joining me for another video as we work to empower and equip you with the confidence and skills to write your own story so that you can live your life on purpose. Today is part 2 on the exploration of cognitive distortions. In my last video, we defined the term cognitive distortions and got clear on just how they develop and the impact they can have. Today we're going to walk through the 12 most common cognitive distortions, what they are, examples of how they may show up in your life, and the impact they can have. We'll also talk about ways to challenge them and begin to dismantle the hold they have on us. Now, before we dive in, be sure to take the time to watch the first video. I put the link in the show notes so that the context of these distortions makes sense to you, especially in considering how they tie into shame and negative core beliefs. All right, let's dive in. You'll remember from the last video that cognitive distortions are heavily exaggerated or over-applied thought filters that we wear like a pair of glasses. We become dependent on them to see and make sense of the world. These beliefs aren't based on fact, but on negative evaluations of the self and others and shame-based thinking. They often lead to significant psychological rigidity and distress. Now, the first of these beliefs is referred to as a mental filter. Mental filter is a fixation on the negative. It could be specific to a particular event or the world at large. Imagine it like a strainer wherein only negative information passes through. This makes it so that all stories and experiences get processed through this lens and anything neutral or positive goes unseen or dismissed. Some examples might be having an annual review and leaving it, focusing only on the areas of improvement or critical feedback received, rather than all of the growth identified and compliments given. Might be focusing on one negative comment your partner made instead of seeing all of the positive interactions and comments that you've had together or that they've shared with you. Now, over time, the impact of this distortion is increased rigidity within a shame-based narrative, decreased self-efficacy, and an increased sense of helplessness or lack of control in one's life, which can lead to a sense of apathy or hopelessness, i.e., what's the point? You might also experience heightened interpersonal distress, communication issues, and an increased sense of helplessness. So what do we do about it? Well, with mental filter, we can challenge it by first noticing for yourself when you're focusing on the negative and asking, what story did I come in with that I'm working to support? Did you come in assuming you were a bad employee or undeserving of a strong relationship, so you're looking for data to support this? You can ask what conclusions are drawn when you focus only on the negative. How does that impact how you think, feel, act, and connect in the world? And what does that feel like for you? I also like to ask, are these conclusions absolutely, positively true and valid? Do they consider the whole picture or factor in all of the data? Is there any neutral or positive data that we're missing? Was it all negative? For example, you may have had some hard feedback in your review. What else was talked about? Was it truly all bad? Did they say you're a bad employee? Is it absolutely true that your partner only ever makes negative comments or tells you what you aren't doing? When we draw absolute conclusions about ourselves, these conclusions are shame-based. Draft a different conclusion based on this interaction that focuses on behavior or circumstance, rather than generalizing a conclusion to you as a person. Am I a bad therapist because I got critical feedback about how to grow? Does it discount every positive or neutral interaction I've had with a client? Can we as people be defined so simply? And also, would you say that about someone else going through this experience? The next of these distortions is called overgeneralization. Opposite of mental filter, overgeneralization is the over-application of a thought, assumption, or fear. It's taking something that occurred after one event or a series of events and assuming it'll happen all the time. Or more simply, if it happened once, it can happen again. And over time, can becomes it will happen again. Or when X, then Y. And you begin to respond as if this is true in every scenario. Rules get defined using words like all, never, always, every. And examples might be something like, I had a bad interaction on a dating app, so I'll never have a good experience or make a connection with someone. I didn't get into the college I wanted to go to or get the promotion I wanted. I'm stupid, unqualified, and will never get into college or get a better job. I made plans to try something new. They didn't work out. And I might say, things never work out, so why try? Now, the impact over time is increased anxiety and a perseveration on ideas and thoughts. We might increase our isolation and withdraw a bit more from people, and we'll decrease our risk-taking and often become stagnated. Example, we maybe don't even try for a promotion or try something new because it didn't work out in the past. So how do we challenge this one? I like to play the game Prove It, which you're going to hear about a lot in this video. So we're so sure that every time we do X, it's going to turn out that way, or that X always means Y. Has there ever been a time when this wasn't true? Would the outcome be guaranteed even in different circumstances, like different jobs, a different dating app, a different person? Prove it. Make an impenetrable case against it based on fact rather than subjective interpretation. In this, you can ask yourself, is this true for everyone or just me? Whenever we establish rules specific to us, it again signals that shame is involved. Ask yourself what makes it only true for you. Is this the case for everyone else? Has there ever been a time it's gone differently for others? You also need to shift to see the situation in context. Generalizations happen by removing context, so we need to consider all the details of the story and then ask ourselves if the outcome may be specific to this interaction, and if in fact we can predict with absolute certainty it'll always be the case. Now, I'll put a link to a video I made on context versus content in the show notes for you to dive deeper on that topic, because it's definitely one we can use for this and other distortions we'll talk about. Next up, we have all or nothing or polarized thinking. All or nothing is experiencing the world in absolutes. There's no gray area, there's only good or bad, right or wrong. This is an extreme form of oversimplification that creates very rigid and often unrealistic standards for oneself and others. Similar to overgeneralization, words like always, never, every, and all can be used here too. And examples might show up in things like setting a New Year's resolution that you'll meditate for 10 minutes every day. You miss a day, and then rather than continuing on the next day, you label the goal as a failure and stop trying. You see someone as a good friend until they let you down or have one disagreement and then code the relationship as bad and write it off. You've always been an A student, you go to college, and then you get a B in your first semester biology course and tell yourself you're a failure and you'll never get through college. Now, over time, the impact of this distortion is, again, that interpersonal distress that can get created and a difficulty connecting in relationships. Expectations of perfection that create heightened anxiety and distress become kind of added on to and expanded on over time. And you might feel a sense of low self-efficacy and disrupted confidence, and then, as such, have a difficulty in engaging in things as a learner due to expectations that one should be perfect or be able to do it all right away, rather than seeing it as a process. So how do we challenge it? First, we need to introduce doubt. You'll see this theme show up throughout the distortions. Is this rule always true? And is it true for everyone? Have you ever been wrong? Can we know with absolute certainty? Because again, rules driven by perfection are anxiety driven. What does it mean about you if you miss a day of meditating? What's your fear if you have a fight with somebody? What makes you think everyone hates you because one person doesn't like you? If we expect perfection, we're afraid of the domino effect of not getting it. We set these rigid rules as protection, and if one person doesn't like me, it may feel safest to assume everyone doesn't like me because then I can desensitize myself to the pain and prevent future hurt. It's also helpful for us to shift from production or outcome-driven conclusions to progression. This goes back to that idea of a learner mindset. Consider babies and toddlers. Every stage of development is a result of significant practice and failure. Failure is a necessary part of the process. Sometimes they get it wrong. We wouldn't tell a 1-year-old they'll never be able to walk or that they failed because they keep falling on their butt. We'd encourage them to keep trying. So what makes the rules different for us? How can we see beauty and opportunity in the role of a learner rather than a performer? Now, the next two, mind reading and fortune telling, often go hand in hand. Mind reading is when we assume to know what someone else is thinking or feeling. These conclusions go unchecked and are believed to be true. The assumptions are often negative and impact the way we interact with others. Examples might be that your coworker seems upset in your team meeting, and rather than asking them how they feel, you assume they're upset with you about something you said in the meeting. Or maybe you see a stranger look at you while talking to someone else and assume, oh, they must be talking about me. Another example might be that your friend was super active in a text conversation you were having and then suddenly stopped engaging. You assume it was something that you said and that they're annoyed with you rather than consider any other part of what might be going on in their lives. Now, the impact is that this will create a sense of high interpersonal distress and conflict. Assumption-based decision-making and actions are going to show up a lot and create more significant distress and conflict in those relationships. And we can also start to develop an inherent sense of distrust in others. So how do we challenge it? First, you need to ask yourself, is it true? Again, go back to this idea of prove it. Is it absolutely true? How can you know? And can you prove you're right? Putting yourself in a position to assume what others think, feel, want, or need takes away their power and responsibility and unloads it onto you. This creates an imbalance on both ends and doesn't allow for open communication and connection. This becomes a great way for shame to introduce ideas about how something is or appears to be and impacts the way that we engage. Also, have you ever been wrong? One of the best ways to introduce doubt is to check in with times you've been wrong in the past or draw conclusions that turned out to be unfounded. For example, I used to assume that my mother-in-law was mad at me or didn't like me based on her mood or how I interpreted her communication style. Years into my relationship, my husband brought it up to her and she laughed hysterically. I had told myself stories for years about how she felt about me and that were not only untrue, but likely took away opportunities for us to get to know each other more openly. Are you giving yourself too big of a role in their lives? I think that's a big thing that I think about when I think about challenging this distortion. If we're always the hero, victim, and villain in everyone's story, we're giving ourselves too much credit, responsibility, and control. Now, on the flip side, fortune telling is about jumping to a conclusion and assuming an outcome to a situation with little or no evidence. This is often tied up with overgeneralization and is a projection onto a situation and experience based on things that have happened in the past or things we fear could happen. Examples might be assuming your boss will deny you a promotion, so you just decide not to ask for it. Or predicting that your partner will be upset with you or feel a lot of shame if you tell them you don't like something they made for dinner, so you pretend to enjoy it to save their feelings. Now, over time, the impact might be that you avoid trying new things or engaging in situations that seem difficult or anxiety-provoking. You might have a generally lower sense of self-evaluation and life satisfaction due to stagnancy in how one engages in relationships or new experiences. So how do we challenge this one? I hope you see the theme where I'm bringing up the prove it method over and over again. Go back to this idea. How do you know? What evidence do you have, and is it objective? Have you proven it based on fact, shame, anxiety, or fear? Are you anchoring your worth on how others respond? One of the biggest things that stops us from asking for or communicating our needs is the fear of how others will respond. Sure, not getting a promotion or disappointing someone is painful. But by not saying anything because of the fear this would be the outcome, we're reinforcing that our value is dependent on how someone else reacts or responds to us. Instead, how can you shift the focus on the success being in the ask or assertion rather than the outcome? How can you value your intention and not allow yourself or a situation to be defined by what may happen? I made a video on this too, which I will be sure to include in the show notes, so check that down on the bottom when you're done. And lastly, ask yourself, what if I'm wrong? What if not asking is stopping you from a second date or the promotion or greater intimacy? What if not telling someone how you feel keeps you feeling lonely, resentful, and stuck rather than allowing the opportunity to connect on a greater level? Our next distortions are called magnification and minimization. This distortion, which we kind of put into one bucket here, involves a skewed perspective and making the value or importance of something bigger or smaller based on your self-worth and story. Now, the tendency here is to inflate anything negative and minimize anything positive. Bad things become added proof of your shortcomings, and good things become luck, a mistake, or something that you can explain away. Some examples of magnification might be that you played in a recital or gave a presentation, you made one mistake. Rather than seeing the performance or presentation as a whole and acknowledge all aspects, you fixate on that error. On the side of minimization, it might be something like a friend of yours tells you how great of a friend you are. You discredit their compliment and point out all the ways you feel you've come up short or let them down. Or maybe a small business owner may win a grant and dismiss it as luck or make a case that they shouldn't have ever won. So what's the impact? Over time, you can have difficulty trusting others unless their view or opinion aligns with your self-narrative. You might steer conversations towards negatives about yourself and have difficulty receiving any positive feedback or responses. And this is going to create a self-fulfilling prophecy by beginning to perform at a lower rate or have you withdraw in relationships, and then using that as evidence or feedback onto the narratives that you have. So how do we challenge this? Similar to that all or nothing or polarized thinking, we have to find the gray. What lies between the extremes? Can we find good, bad, and neutral in every situation? And whenever I get stuck here, I task myself with finding a success, fact, and opportunity for growth. This allows me to see where there may be places to keep working on something, but doesn't allow me to get stuck or fixated there. I also like to tell other people what I'm thinking, because we've learned that one of the best ways to attack shame is by talking openly about it and finding variance in how someone else may interpret something. This is especially helpful if one receives empathy from others. Find someone you trust to tell them when you draw these conclusions or get stuck fixating on these points. Tell your friend it feels hard to accept positive feedback because you have a hard time believing it. Let your coach know that you feel it's hard to compete without getting stuck on what you did wrong. From here, we're going to go on to personalization, which is one I struggle with a lot. It's probably one of the distortions that I will carry with me forever. Personalization is about making everything about you. It's your fault, responsibility, problem. I refer to this as making yourself the hero, victim, and villain in everyone else's story. You're responsible for taking care of everything and everyone, and if anything goes wrong, it's because of something you didn't do or a character flaw of yours. And you're to blame for everything they experience and feel. Some of the examples that come up when we think about personalization could be telling yourself, if I had only done blank, everything would have worked out. Or maybe you are making an assumption that a family member didn't join a group of you for dinner because she's upset with you, something that you did, or a way that you didn't show up for her. Might be that a friend of yours has a horrible breakup and you feel like, gosh, I should have told them earlier how I felt about their partner, as if you were responsible for or could have predicted this and needed to stop them from going through this to make this decision on their own or experience their own journey through pain. Now, the impact of this one is that you hold an inherent belief in your inadequacy and yet over responsibility. You assume responsibility and power over other people's lives that can lead to interpersonal conflict, tension, and heightened anxiety, and takes them out of as the primary character of their own story. Taking the blame for and trying to solve pain points and problems for others that may have nothing to do with you becomes familiar territory because it's an attempt to correct a situation and alleviate distress for all involved. So how do we challenge this one? First up, we need to complete the story. Fill in the other characters. What roles do they play? Are you doing everything? Again, think back to this idea of hero, victim, and villain. If we're responsible for everyone else's life, we're tasking ourselves with being the primary character in every story. This is dismissive of the individual's own story and adds an extreme layer of pressure to our own. Now, you'll probably get sick of hearing these two words together, but come back to the prove it idea. How can we know this is all on you? Would eating a certain way have stopped someone from getting cancer? Would leaving sooner have prevented the accident? We can't know anything for sure and would find ourselves hard-pressed to prove that each outcome is our responsibility alone. And third, we need to practice radical acceptance. We need to get clear on what is and is not in our control and what is and is not our responsibility. There's comfort in trying to control everything because it gives you a false sense of security. But we can't control and are not responsible for almost everything in the world. We can only control how we show up and respond. We can't prevent pain. We can't make people live the lives we want. We're not the primary character in their story. I'm going to include another video that I made on radical acceptance in the show notes below because I think this is a topic many of us could benefit from either watching or revisiting. The next one is one of my favorite cognitive distortions to talk about, albeit maybe my second in command in my own experiences, but it's shoulds and musts. This distortion is founded on making should, supposed to, ought, and must statements. Anytime these words are used, it signals the notion or rule is connected to shame and the drive for external validation and approval. These may be used to set rules and standards for the self and expectations about the world at large. So, for example, it might be taking your child to the park, they get sick, and then telling yourself, oh, I shouldn't have taken them there. Internalizing beliefs such as, I have to be in a thin body, or I should work out every day to be healthy. Maybe it's, I'm supposed to be able to handle this, or I should stop talking to X, I should continue on and get my PhD. And the impact is that we start to develop an external locus of control and shift your sense of self to how others respond and view you and your choices. Over time, this can cause burnout and resentment. Shoulds vary in different roles and settings, so the conflict that can arise when different expectations don't line up can cause even heightened distress, and chasing the approval of others is a journey that never feels complete. Okay, so how do we challenge it? First up, we need to ask ourselves the question, why? Why must or should you do X? What does it mean about you if you don't? Get to the root fear or anxiety. So for example, I should stay late at work like my coworkers. Why? Because I want them to know I take my work seriously. If I go home, they'll think I'm less invested. Okay, but now let's go deeper with the why. Why? Why does that matter? Well, I worry that this will affect my job standing, and I don't want to be seen as lazy or uncommitted. Now consider, who am I doing this for? So not only why, but who? While it's essential to factor in people we value in our lives and consider their needs and wants, there's a line between that and making our life choices based on someone else. You can also circle back to question 1 and ask yourself how this connects to your relationship with this person. I also like to ask myself, do you want to do this? Again, shifting from have to, should, supposed to, must to do you want to? Now, want is a tricky word because, for example, someone might start off saying, I should quit smoking. They know the health effects, they've talked to their doctor. If you ask them if they want to quit, the answer may very well be no. They may long to keep smoking. Instead, when you think of this question, consider, do I desire or am I willing to do blank? If you take other people's approval or that drive for external validation off the table, do you want to do that? How can you pivot from the shoulds to what you want? And are you willing to do or are you going to do what is necessary to get there? And what processing and distress tolerance skills do you need to help you manage that gap? Finally, I like to use Byron Katie's The Work in this process. Whenever we find ourselves using these statements, the idea is to walk through a series of 4 questions that help us consider if this is true and how believing it is true may be affecting us. Now, number 9 is emotional reasoning. Emotional reasoning is the assertion of your feelings as fact. How you feel becomes synonymous with who you are or how things exist in the world. Examples might be that you see your partner talking to someone else and you get jealous, which stimulates thoughts that they might be interested in someone else. Over time, you allow those thoughts to become self-proclaimed truths. You see someone else in your field get presented with an opportunity that you had also applied for. You feel disheartened at the loss and begin to believe that you'll never make it in the business and that this is all a result of you not being able to hack it. Or maybe you notice your anxiety ramping up, but you aren't clear why. The feeling of being anxious leads you to believe there's something to be worried about and can compound upon itself. You feel a lot of shame, maybe about your new role as a parent. You find yourself feeling like you're failing in everything that you do. And over time, the shame mixed with those distortions takes, I feel like I'm failing as a parent, to I'm failing as a parent, or I'm a bad parent. The impact of this distortion is that we become emotionally driven in our decision-making, which can lead us to be reactive or impulsive and have significant unintended consequences. Difficulty connecting to and trusting our body can also show up in how we listen to or don't listen to what it's telling us. This can lead to numbing and detachment-based coping skills like substance use and eating disorders. So how do we challenge the emotional raising? First, we have to notice the language that we use in these situations. Ask yourself if the beliefs you have are fact or feeling. One way to tell is that facts are consistent, feelings ebb and flow. If I feel like I'm a terrible cook, there will be times this will be more or less true. If I am a terrible cook, it will always be true no matter what I make or do or how I practice. We can also create a gap between thoughts and feelings and action. Thoughts and emotions are transient experiences. They cycle in and out, but they do ebb and flow. If we react to them at their peak, we reinforce them as truths and condition an automatic thought or feeling to result in a specific reaction or behavior. The goal with thoughts and emotions is instead to inform, maybe even guide behaviors, but not dictate them. Next up is the labeling distortion, or creating generalizations and assumptions based on an experience or behavior. You define a person's character as a result of this experience rather than seeing the experience or behavior as a part of the person. Labeling is an extension of overgeneralization and plays significantly into the development and perpetuation of shoulds and musts. The labels used in this distortion are negative, often highly emotional and extreme. I think of them almost like rigid boxes that become unshakable once applied. Examples might be, you're a bad driver because you got into a car accident, or your coworker thinks they're better than everyone else because they left early today, or the sales associate is a jerk because of how they interacted with you regarding a return. The impact over time is that it can lead to rapid assessments and characterizations of the self and others that become rigid and inflexible. Mental filters are then applied to find and bring in any information that further solidifies these labels. We might also oversimplify and reduce the human experience, which leads to a sense of hopelessness and helplessness. The labels define you, and we boil down a person into that label. And it feels like there's no way to change it. And over time, you can notice that maybe a lot of interpersonal tension and conflict can arise. Interactions with others may be characterized by assumptions and defenses that result from conclusions, and as such, create that conflict. So challenging it is really about coming back to the idea of seeing the context rather than oversimplifying or boiling things down to content. A content-focused lens reduces a person's character and overall self based on what they do or how they act. A context-driven lens sees a person in the full context of their life and considers the entirety of who they are and the breadth of their actions and behaviors. Context-driven awareness also includes factors outside of the individual and draws informed but flexible hypotheses rather than judgments. Now, number 11, we've got 2 more to go. Number 11 is called discounting the positives. And like mental filter or minimization, discounting the positives is about dismissing any positive feedback or experience. The experience of imposter syndrome is often associated with this, or the feeling that you're a fraud or have somehow tricked people into thinking highly or positively of you while you're waiting to be found out. An example might be someone assuming someone is giving you a compliment or supporting you due to political correctness. Like, oh, well, you have to say that because you're my mom. Or you receive a thank you card from someone really grateful for how you showed up for them, and you respond with, I was just doing what anyone else would have done. Maybe you get a promotion and you immediately question it. You believe that somehow you fooled everybody or manipulated your way into a position rather than seeing that there might be any merit or value that you offered. The impact of this one is that over time, we really lower our sense of self-efficacy, which has been a theme across all these distortions, as well as we lose our trust in our own ability or reproducibility of a result. There's also a degree of apathy or wondering what's the point, as you assume things will always be this way. And over time, that can lead to a learned helplessness or the belief that you have no power or control and will always be stuck in a situation. So we challenge this one by really figuring out how can we allow both stories to exist. One of the ways this distortion and many others is perpetuated is through the assumption that your view is the only way to see it. You have it right and any other interpretations are dismissed to preserve your conclusions. It's unreasonable to assume that you will accept that different interpretations or reactions may be accurate as you first challenge these distortions. You may even see how your views of yourself or the world are rigid or negative, but still resist adopting another view. That's protection in your brain. Instead, acknowledge that this is your story or belief and just make space for someone else's interpretations or assessments to be different. For example, I feel like I'm a terrible employee who's barely holding it together. My boss views me as hardworking and valuable to the team. They tell me how they value my ideas and encourage me to share more. We have different stories and beliefs about me as an employee. Both can exist. Now, the last distortion is probably, as I'm thinking about it, arguably my actual favorite, or maybe it's just the one that comes up most often. It's control fallacies. Control fallacies are similar to the pendulum swing of all or nothing and magnification and minimization. And when we engage in this distortion, we swing between feeling like we have no control and complete control over everything around us. Now, if you recall my discussion of the hero, victim, and villain, this distortion perfectly describes how this comes to be. We assume complete control and therefore responsibility, which means we have to be and take care of everything. We're responsible for anything wrong that happens to us or to anyone around us. And over time, this compounds on us and we begin to swing in the other direction, assuming we have no power or control. So examples of this might include feeling like everything has happened and you had no choice. There was nothing that you could have done. Or no matter what I do, things will always be this way. Or in some cases, it's about finding circumstances outside of you that set you up to fail. Such as maybe, there was no way I could have completed that report by the deadline. That was a ridiculous ask to begin with. Or they should have sent a reminder email for my appointment. If we think about it on the opposite side, when we think about having all the control, we might think we are responsible for our partner's depression, that we could just fix it or should have done something to stop what they're going through. Or maybe your child is struggling with something developmental and you begin running a list of everything that you could have done or should have done or known to prevent this. You immediately ascribe blame and assume all responsibility to fix it. Now, the impact of this pendulum swing is that we have a lot of difficulty engaging in team-based work. We have an increased sense of isolation and difficulty asking for help, and over time, we experience an increased sense of helplessness, hopelessness, burnout, and shame. Well, challenging this is very similar to many of the other distortions. First up, we have to practice radical acceptance, or the clarification of what is and is not in our control. We have to determine what is ours and let go of the pieces that aren't, and learn to be okay with that. Consider how that external locus of control may be creating a system through which you avoid addressing the things in your control, or attempting to detach from dealing with distress, maybe by trying to fix or logic your way through something else. So I'm going to put that video in the show notes to go deeper on that. And again, I highly encourage you that you watch that video and think more about radical acceptance. Now, the other thing that we can do is go back to that building up the characters in the story. We can't be every role. What roles do other characters play? What role does nature play? Did no one else have any part in circumstances, or was everything absolutely out of your control? And with that, we're going to need to get clear on our fear. What fear do you have about letting go of control? Or what fears do you have about owning your role? All right, there you have it. These are the 12 most common cognitive distortions, which I know is a lot. But remember, you don't have to tackle everything in one fell swoop. Cognitive distortions are a universal experience that have developed over decades of shame-driven beliefs and behaviors, and we can't rid ourselves of them in one sitting. It is going to take time, and it's going to require grace and compassion. Focus on the long-term gain by doing this work as you tackle each 1% change in full as you are. To help you with that, I want to encourage you to pick one of the cognitive distortions I talked about today. Maybe the most salient, the easiest to identify. Whatever reason you want for picking, pick one and commit to working on that specifically. Be sure to comment down below with which one you chose and what that focus is going to look like, or what steps you're going to take to start to address it, so that we can hold ourselves accountable, but also build a sense of community and support for each other as we make these changes. Be sure to take a look at the video notes to access all the resources I mentioned, including a handout that I have that gives you each of these cognitive distortions completely spelled out so that you can have a document to come back to, as well as timestamps in the video that tell you when I address each one of these distortions. If you like what you're hearing, be sure to subscribe so that instead of having to check back regularly, you can just get an alert every time something new's been uploaded and you have new awesomeness to check out. And if you want to stay in the know on everything I'm doing in Adversity Rising, click the link in the show notes to sign up for my email list, where you'll get exclusive access to content that I don't share anywhere else and be able to stay in the know on all the goings-on of Adversity Rising. Thank you so much for being here with me today. Cognitive distortions is a beast to talk about and to tackle. And remember, you are not alone, but you do have the right to write your own story. So let's go get that pen back together and get you in the driver's seat.